What's the worst thing that's happened to one of your friends? My friend lost her husband after he developed some blood clots. Then 5 months later her 2 kids were killed in a car accident. He died of a seizure in the middle of the night. The worst part was he was going to see a neurologist the next day about his sudden onset of seizures. R.I.P. Tommy. One of my friends was sliding down a railing that was next to a ground storm drain made of concrete. He slipped backwards and cracked his skull open. It was near midnight and we were pretty close to the hospital, so I just kinda picked him up and ran. I hope I never see the inside of someone's head up close again. Edit, since people keep asking me if my friend is still alive. He isn't, is doing much better. A friend in high school was hit by a car and dragged a couple of 100 yards before he died. The driver was drunk and on coke. It was 8 AM when it happened. My friend was on his way to school. Murdered by an unknown person. There was some extremely shady poop going on at the time. They found her dead in bed with the front door wide open. 28 years on. I still miss her so much. He and his brother were away at college. His father fell asleep with a cigar in hand. And the house began to burn. So far as could be determined. The father woke. Went to get his wife. Carried her downstairs. And made it to within a couple feet of the door. They both died. And the house was destroyed. My friend had another good friend of ours die in his arms after being shot 3 times from a drive-by. Even to this day, 9 years later, he feels like that they were meant for him and lives with some guilt. A friend of mine was murdered. Shot 14 times. He was left for dead on somewhat remote road. He was 15. 2 of my good friends, twins, got in a car accident. They were upside down in a wooded area. The one brother died instantly, while the other was upside down for 3 hours until someone saw their car. And I miss you. Went swimming in a lake and got tangled in a bunch of weeds and drowned. R.I.P. Dan. My friend was found after not breathing for 10+ minutes. They got his heart started again and he lived for a few more years, but he never walked or talked again. Me and my 3 other friends were longboarding down this highway and suddenly one of my friend crashed into a tree head first. For some reason his helmet went off before impact. We managed to get him to the hospital as fast as possible. He suffered itch. Went into a coma and died 2 hours later. This happened 4 years ago, the 28th of May. I had a friend who I went through elementary school and middle schools with. He moved away in the middle of 7th grade and our friend group was heartbroken. But figured we'd see him again. Last week. He was shot in the head by his friend who was showing him a gun and pointed it at him as a joke. He was 18. Finished a workout at the gym and collapsed on his way out. Brain aneurysm. He was dead 6 days later. His girlfriend, who he had a 3-year daughter with, one day just grabbed everything and the kid and left for a different country, leaving no trace behind her. That was 15 years ago and my friend has been looking for his daughter non-stop. He has a blog where he posts letters for her to find in case she ever googles her name. But it points out that the mother changed her identity and the daughter's. I can't imagine how that feels. Tried to swim to shore from a sailboat in Lake Michigan. She was a strong swimmer. But even in the summer hypothermia is a threat. They didn't find her body for several days and during that time famous fake psychic Sylvia F***ing Brown told the family she was alive and being held on a boat against her will. Still miss you. Julie. My best friend was shot point blank in the head by her husband and then he killed himself. She survived with no long-term damage. He was helping an elderly couple with chores around the house to help support his new family. They had 2 adult children. They were both in town at the time. The son shot his sister, his parents, and then my friend and Amp, put the gun in his hand and Amp pinned it all on him. didn't take long to prove who done it. But not after his name was tarnished. In high school, a friend of mine was stopped at an intersection when some lady rear-ended him. She was PPing with her phone and didn't even slow down. This pushed his vehicle through the intersection and pinned a girl waiting for the bus against a telephone pole, where she died. He killed himself freshman year of college. God knows why. We think a friend figured out why he did it. But we don't ask. Because he took the hardest part. He wasn't the one who found him, but since he was his best friend, the family called him and he saw him hanging. He was the one who retraced his steps in those last hours. One of my friends just lost her almost 2-year-old child in a drowning accident. She's utterly devastated. There's a really good friend of mine that was driving his girlfriend at the time and got hit by a drunk driver. Only fatality of that accident was my friend's GF. It's been about 10-15 years and he still doesn't drive. That poop destroyed him. He is still a happy dude, but it isn't the same for real. Just broke. He broke several bones as a child. At age 9 he was hit by a car and shattered his pelvis. Then in school on the first day of 5th grade he fell off the monkey bars and broke both arms in a gruesome manner. One's parents were in a tour plane crash in Hawaii. Another one's parents went off a cliff in a jeep. In Hawaii. Vacations. She killed herself after she found out she was pregnant. We hadn't even been out of high school for a year. I couldn't go to her funeral because I was training in the army. I still dream about her sometimes. I miss you, Nicole. She was cycling through London and a bus hit her so hard she came off, landed on head, and died. She was also quite literally the last member of her family. Both her parents were only childs and had both died of cancer. And she had no siblings. Her death was the end of her family tree. She was 23. He was kidnapped, never to be seen again. I miss him. Edit. We worked together and the owners had businesses with drug dealers. Actually, one of the owners was killed years prior. I quit in September 2015 and I begged him to quit. It wasn't worth it. He replied, dude, there are no jobs. I cannot simply quit. In November, him and another former co-worker, with whom I wasn't too close with, went to see a terrain for the owners. Nobody knew what happened. Probably the owners, but they didn't really cared. Some hinted he isn't necessarily dead. But the options are, he became a hitman against his own will or he became a slave. Not really better tbh. Their mother passed away suddenly at a pretty young age. Their father was already out of the picture for other reasons. They were strong, but it was certainly hard on them. He was forced at gunpoint to help his ex-girlfriend transport and bury the body of her current boyfriend. He was arrested, but the truth came out and she was sent to prison. Edit. As a follow-up to all of the questions. This happened in the early 90s. And I didn't meet my friend until 97. This wasn't pre-internet. But pretty close, as those that had a computer at home still had AOL dial-up. So unfortunately, no link. And I don't remember her name. If I ever knew it, and I don't want to make it weird to ask him. Lol. What I know is that she came to his house at night with the gun and had him take the body to the NJ Pine Barrens. I imagine that she did this because if I ever had a body to dispose of, I'd call him too. He's on the smaller side but has the equivalent strength to a human-sized ant. He went to therapy for a time after. But is doing fine now, married with a kid. He's still freakishly strong. People who break into cars are generally not the kind of people with well-documented, traceable identities. They're at the bottom. And the good ones can get it done without leaving a meaningful trace. Anyway. So they don't have much to lose and can get away with anything. So if you're like my friend, and you see someone breaking into your car at 1 AM behind a strip mall with no cameras, you shouldn't get involved. But if you were my friend that night, you decide to confront the bastard, and you get stabbed to death, And there are no leads. I had 3 friends on the Alaska Airlines plane that crashed off San Diego. It's hard to say what's the worst. I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma and many of my childhood friends have died well before their time. One of them was murdered execution style after a bad business deal surrounding a music video. Another forgot to put the parking brake on while making a quick repair on a derrick and it rolled back on him and crushed his head. Another disappeared after a tour in Iraq. Just called his wife to say he couldn't come home because he had murdered children. A lot of the ones that are still alive are in prison or in and out of rehab. I've gone through a few things that seemed awful, but I've been very lucky to avoid the worst of it, I think. When I was little, a friend of mine died on the operating table from a long-term illness concerning her bowels. I don't know if I knew she was sick or not. It was tragic. And my first experience with death. I was in 3rd grade. Her name was Jenny. A good friend of mine was shot in the head by an ex-boyfriend. She lived for a few days until her parents took her off life support. The ex holed up in his apartment and went into a standoff until he killed himself. I love you, Elena. Died racing motocross and left 3 kids and a wife behind. Greatest guy I ever met. Jesus, thread man. Makes you realize how lucky you are sometimes. A good friend of mine has a sister that lived in the southern US. We're in NY. One day she gets a call that the sister had a bad accident. Was in a coma. And probably wouldn't make it. She, along with other family members, go down to see her. Well, she wakes up. At that point her husband told the family they had to leave. The family figured all along that the husband did it, history of abuse. And they figured that the sister would tell what happened and that's why husband made them leave. Eventually sister tells them to leave because she's controlled by her husband. Fast forward to now and sister is here in NY having left the husband with her young daughter. She did finally admit that he did it, but I don't know the details and I don't know if he's been charged with a crime. But she's left with a wobbly gait and no real speech. She has a very low mumble. What's interesting is that the daughter is speaking 3 languages: English, Spanish, her family's native language, and mumble. She imitates her mother's speech. It's kinda sweet actually. And most importantly, she and her mom are safe. A friend of mine's father dropped dead in the middle of her sister's 5th birthday party. 1 minute eating cake and playing games. Dead on the floor the next. It was a blood clot or an aneurysm. After he died, her mom tried to get custody of the 3 kids. She was a terrible mom who had lost full custody years earlier. Thankfully tons of family were able to help out and her stepmom, who is a fantastic person, finally got custody. While dealing with all of this, she relied heavily on her high school boyfriend. He was then diagnosed with leukemia and was dead within 6 months of her father. Thankfully she had a great therapist at the time. Stepmom paid for it even before dad passed to help deal with the trauma from her mom. She's now in her early 30s and has become a therapist herself. My friend was murdered by a psychopath. She set fire to his apartment which had no fire escape. Killed his wife, his 2-year-old son and his niece and nephew, both 5 and 7. She went drink in a bar after the attack and was laughing about bitches in prison now and hopefully she will leave in a body bag. Where do I start? 7 concussions. Partial body paralyzation. Severe car crash. Out of work, unable to drive for months. A couple seizures. 2nd-degree burns, falling face first into a fire. I know there's more I'm forgetting. This all happened to the same guy in the span of like 4-5 years. Cut up in pieces by her husband. Then hidden in box of dirt on the balcony. Let him crash at ours when he was between places. While I was out he got drunk and tried to bully my wife into having hanky-panky with him. He told her, if you don't I will tell him you did and he will believe me. She suggested he go get some beers first and then lock the doors. Hid out at a neighbor's and called me and the cops. Cops got there before I did and couldn't actually arrest him for anything, but basically said he should frick off to somewhere else or we will find a reason to take you to jail. Good thing too, because if I got there first, I would probably gotten arrested for kicking his ass. My friend went to rescue a snowboarder who'd gone down a shady chute, hit his head and was knocked unconscious. My friend fell down the chute in a similar manner and broke both his legs.
Hi there. Look, if you enjoyed the video, well, why not go ahead and hit that like and subscribe to Reddit Stories. In fact, if you want to see even more responses to this thread, well then, take a look. There's the link in the description below. And remember, show some love to those authors while you're there. And I look forward to seeing you next time.